What's your name?
Sam Scarlett.
What's your religion?
The I.W.W.
That ain't no religion.
The only one I got.
Who's your next of kin?
I don't have any.
Well, who's your best friend?
Big Bill Haywood.
He's in here with you.
He's still my best friend.
What's your nationality?
None.
Well, what country are you a citizen of?
I am a citizen of industry.
Where is your home?
Cook County Jail.
Before that?
County Jail, Cleveland, Ohio.
And before that?
City Jail, Akron, Ohio.
Look, are you a citizen?
No, I'm an industrial worker of the world.
There was a strike on in Vancouver, BC, and the Chinaman couldn't pronounce W, and so he called it I.W.W. And so out of the I.W.W. came the one wobbly.
The one who was a working man could not be denied membership for any reason, as long as he was an actual wage worker, race, creed, color, for any
sex.
reason, sex, whatever. If he was an actual wage worker within the industry, he was entitled to membership.
Condemned the whole system of what they call dog eat dog, you know, this idea that everybody lived off of everybody else, and mostly off the working class. When they voiced these ideas, of course, they upset people, and people were just upset with those words. I.W.W. was a fear phrase for 10 or 15 years in the United States.
There is power in a land of working men. When they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union band.
Would you have mansions of gold in the sky and live in a shack away in the back? Would you have wings up in heaven to fly and starve here with rags on your back?
There is power in a land of working men. When they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand.
If you've had enough of the blood of the land, then join in the grand industrial band. If for a change you have eggs and ham, then come do your share like a man.
There is power in a land of working men. When they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand. Come, all ye workers from every land, come join in the grand industrial band. Then we our share of this earth shall demand. Come on, do your share like a man. There is power in a land of working men. When they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union brand.
The I.W.W. stood for Industrial Workers of the World. Work, good wages, and respect. That's what they wanted for the workers. To be people, not nobody.
See, those three letters, I, W, W, I, industrial work of the world.
And the union, this I.W.W, he would try to organize all workers into one union.
You know, a lot of their slogans put out used to tickle me. One they used an awful lot was trust in the Lord and sleep in the street. Another one was Jesus saves the willing slaves. I never saw them yet. We'd plaster them all over the country, little 2x4 stickers, you know, or gummed on the back. You just wet them and stick them up on them.
There is power in the land of working men when they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union grand.
At the turn of the century, America was changing rapidly from a basically rural society to an urban industrial one. The completion of the great railroads from coast to coast signaled the end of the frontier. The population had increased 5 times, from 12 million to 60 million. One of the striking features of the period was the rapid growth of the enormous corporations which began to control the basic industries. Largest among them, Rockefeller Standard Oil and Carnegie's U.S. Steel Corporation.
They used to say about owning the factories, which I think would have been a nice thing to do. We would have all worked happy, got the profits for ourselves, which would have been nice instead of one man or two. What was wrong about that? They didn't talk really bad. They were telling the truth. Who wouldn't like it like that? While the others are making millions and you're making nothing.
Any man who pays more for labor than the lowest sum he can get them for is robbing his stockholders.
Well, they were talking about building the one big industrial union and to put the working class in charge of the means of production, more or less without regard to capitalist masters. They're just going to take it over and abolish the wage system. But they're a little vague on where they went from there, you know.
The laboring man will be protected not by labor agitators, but by men of property.
Efficiency and control were the watchwords for the new employing class. This was evident in the introduction of the assembly line and time and motion studies.
One class owns the industry and does not operate them. Another class operates them and does not own them.
Now, one of the events that certainly struck a young man was the industrial warfare, the strife between capital and labor, and workers and employers.
I can hire one half the working class to kill the other half.
But unskilled labor had almost no representation whatever. The AFL didn't take in unskilled workers, and they had no voice to speak for them. It was these conditions that were largely responsible for the founding of the industrial workers of the world. I remember reading of the founding convention of the industrial workers of the world which took place in Chicago in 1905, and headed by men who were already well known to newspaper readers. Big Bill Haywood, for instance, of the Western Federation of Miners, and Eugene V. Debs, candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, and Mother Jones, and many others.
Fellow workers, this is the Continental Congress of the working class. I don't give a snap of my fingers whether skilled workers join this union or not. We don't need them. There are 35 million workers in this country that aren't organized yet. What we want to establish at this time is an organization that will open wide its doors to every man or woman that earns his livelihood by brain or muscle.
My dad warned me about him. He said, no, remember, he's a great speaker, an influential speaker, a good orator, but what he's talking about is just a dream. It can never happen. It'd be a good thing if it could, but it just can't happen, so it's just a dream.
And I had a brother, Emmett, who ran away from home and joined the I.W.W. in Kansas, and that's where I first heard of the I.W.W. Of course, in the papers in Missouri at that time, they built them up as a bunch of devils who were sabotaging the world.
I tried to sign up in 1914, but I could never catch a delegate with any supplies. I tried again in 1915. I had been a member of the Socialist Party of America previous to this, and had taken into mind our free speech fight. And there's where I first saw the I.W.W. in action.
And I asked them whether it would be possible for a person with my background to join the organization. And they said, well, you would indeed a most welcome fellow worker. Anybody who wants to join and work with us is welcome.
Well, that's when I joined the I.W.W. in 1914 in the woods. The Cloquet Lumber Company, I was working for them. And they had maybe 30, 40 Wobblies out in camp. I looked them up and joined them. And it kind of surprised the job delegate there. He'd never heard of anybody come up and volunteering to join.
The Wobbly movement has never been more than a radical fungus on the labor movement, those who could not fit into a normal, rational movement.
The AF of L, we used to call it the F of hell. The AF of L, with its divisiveness, these were skilled workers, machinists and so forth. They had no use whatever for the unskilled or the semi-skilled.
The I.W.W. set out because it was its reason for coming into existence was that the evolution of modern industry had made this craft system, which once upon a time was reasonably germane to the facts of industrial life, it had made it obsolete. It just didn't fit modern industry.
Didn't know what the AFL was, especially there was no such thing as AFL on the riverfront in this port.
In the ports of the Atlantic and of the Gulf Coast, black and white workers were organized in the same unions, which the AFL and the established unions did not permit.
Well, we were on the farm, and conditions were just bad. My parents heard of Pennsylvania, and so to speak, well, you could rake up money out of the street. And we decided, to come north. Getting jobs as far as the Negroes or black is concerned was pretty rough. And the I.W.W. was the only thing it was accepting Negro or black workers, you know, without, freely. We had Fletcher, he was a Negro, and we had one Neff. He was white, but he was a very dedicated Union man, both of these men. We would have our pep talks and whatnot, and Fletcher, after he make a speech or something or other, solidarity, all for one and one for all. We were given the roughest jobs, of course. They would have a rough job even on deck. And if a white came along, why, I didn't have no job. I'd have to go back to something else. The work was so rough, we had to use hand trucks, and two men would load that truck, freight. We'd have to truck it over very rough floors to the side of the ship to be loaded. We worked 10 hours. People were getting hurt, one after another. Just going to the hospital, we had no medical safety rules or anything like that. When the contract ran out, we'd go in for a contract, nothing doing. We had to go out on strike. The results of that, while we were on strike, people were transported from different parts of the country to break strike. Some would be having, you know, guns as same as they were the law, and they would be these vans going down. They would be escorted by police escorts on motorcycles. And a striker would have as much chance before the strike breakers as a rabbit would have before a gunner. The I.W.W. was something for the working man. It didn't make any difference who you was, what kind of work you did. They was out to organize all working people.
In addition to the large migrations from country to city and from south to the north, by the early part of the century, nearly 30 million immigrants from Eastern and Western Europe had helped swell the ranks of unskilled labor.
The trip, well, we were in the steerage. Big room, a lot of people there, all their belongings on the floor, little kids running around. Oh, the noise was, I was little, I was only 5 years old, but it was terrible.
Many of these immigrants found their way to the textile mills of the Northeast, working under the worst imaginable conditions. Low wages, unsanitary housing, long hours, little education. One of the I.W.W.'s largest and most successful strikes broke out in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912 among the workers in the woolen mills.
Giuseppe, did you get the right page?
No, what about you?
The short.
Short page. Shut it down. Sì,
Tagliate le cinghie, tagliate le cinghie, fermate le macchine. Dei nostri figli e ben ci difendiamo. La Lega crescerà.
I was on the spinning room, and this bunch, they come upstairs and they stopped the belt from the machine. They cut them, and they told us to get out and go home, so we stayed out.
From Washington Mill, we went to the Cunard Mill. The Cunard Mill, that mill there, tried to get the workers out, all out. So then the workers of the Cunard Mill follow us or the Washington Mill. From the Washington Mill, we went to the Dock Mill, the corner there. And then from there, we came over to this wood mill here, the wood mill and the hair mill. After the strike took place, I sent for Joe Adder, an organizer of the I.W.W. We had the first mass meeting, we made him on the common, see? And he spoke to us and said to get together and all, and stay together, that we win eventually, see? Greek, Polish people, Lithuanian, Syrians, Portuguese, and then Franco-Belgian, Franco-American. And we formed a general committee and a committee for each nationality. There were 24 nationalities in 1991. So that's the way the strike began.
In the good old picket line, in the good old picket line, the workers are from every place, from nearly every clime. The Greeks and Poles are out so strong, and the Germans all the time. But we want to see more Irish in the good old picket line, in the good old picket line, in the good old picket line.
One Saturday, they were just parading up Essex Street, and they had a lot of children, and the children were being sent to New York to people who would take them and keep them fed and clothed and in school while they were on strike. You know, even yet, when I think of to separate kids from their family when they were in such dire need and trouble. The mothers were crying, the fathers were crying, they were kissing the kids goodbye and everything.
And we had 2 soup kitchens. And then we feed all the people who want to eat. And then we buy food and we distribute the food, the macaroni, beans, bread, and so on, and we give it to the people as much as we can. You understand? And that was my job, to take care of that. Oh, it was hard strike, all right. It was hard strike, you see. Well, you know, we had the militia come over.
Our company of militia went down to Lawrence during the first days of the strike. Most of them had to leave Harvard to do it, but they rather enjoyed going down there to have a fling at these people. Orders were not to shoot until it was absolutely necessary, but then shoot to kill. Many heads were cracked open this first week, but not $1 of damage was done to any of the mills guarded by the soldiers.
The I.W.W. has been accused of putting the women in the front. The truth is, the I.W.W. does not keep them in the back, and they go to the front.
Shall we still be slaves and work for wages? It is outrageous, has been for ages. This earth by right belongs to toilers and not to spoilers of liberty.
They killed Anna Lopizzo, one of the strike, and they accused the Angelo Caruso, one of the strike, of killing her. But a police officer killed Anna Lopizzo, and they accused the 2 strike leaders, Joe Adder and Arturo Giovannitti, of inciting to kill. They did not break the strike. The leader got arrested and the strike continued.
After Adder and Giovannitti had been locked up, the I.W.W. sent Big Bill Haywood to Lawrence to take over leadership of the strike.
But Haywood, he was a big man, and I can remember him up there in the common, and he, you know, beating his arms out and pounding his fist. I remember that very well.
The I.W.W. advocates violence of the most violent sort. Violence that consists of keeping our mouths shut and our hands in our pockets. In doing this and staying on strike, we are committing the most violent of acts, cutting off our labor. Let them weave cloth with bayonets.
And after that, about a couple of weeks afterwards, the mill owner gave up, and we had the meeting with the secretary of the Manufacturer Association just about 9 weeks after the strike began, and we settled up the strike. And that's when they call us un-American, I think they're very inconsistent with the idea of American Revolution. So I disagree entirely with the idea that we were foreign, all right. We were foreign. We were born in a foreign country, but most of us, we love America much more than the owners of the mill did. When the strike was over, the Business People Alliance gave us a banquet to the strike leader. Yeah, and I remember we had a soup kitchen, a chicken soup, and that's a wonderful soup, and I make it now myself. We like that sort of a chicken soup.
Was everybody very happy?
Oh, everybody, all the strike was happy, the strike was happy, and the community was happy, too. That was all over. And it was a much better condition, the city, and after the strike, yeah.
A year after the Lawrence strike, another strike broke out in Paterson, New Jersey, in the silk manufacturing center of the country. But this time, despite their strikers' solidarity and endurance, they were defeated in their demands for the 8-hour day and higher wages.
Conditions, they are bad, and some of you are sad. You cannot see your enemy, the class that lives in luxury. Your working men are poor, will be forevermore, as long as you permit the few to guide your destiny. It was one of the girls, my girlfriend, that I had met at a Wobbly picnic, and we both went out to look for a job. We would take jobs in unorganized factories, try to organize them. And of course, as soon as they found out, no one suddenly, they didn't know how it happened. We looked such innocent young girls that they never thought that we were capable of, of even believing in a union. And we did. And conditions became worse and worse. And there was only one thing to do. You either had to just stop living or become a rebel. And that is when the I.W.W. came in.
Agitators. A bunch of agitators are in Paterson. Agitators.
How did you feel about that?
I used to get mad. I said, they're not agitating us, they're just telling us the truth.
So on a Thursday, when the time had come up, we're supposed to go on a strike. The boss had come by me, he grabbed me by the neck. Said, Mike, if you don't cut it out, I'm gonna throw you out the window. Then I said, listen, Pete, before you're gonna throw me out the window, I gotta get out through the door.
So on the way out, we met so many other people. All the factories were coming out, pouring out. And we all walked to Turnhall, where we held the meeting. And as we were there, then our organizers came in, the I.W.W. Tresca, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, Patrick Quinlan, Haywood. Beautiful people. They were so wonderful. They gave us hope. You know, they just made us feel as though we were going to change the world. And Girlie Flint, she was beautiful. And once she held a meeting for us, all girls, all women. And she said, would you like to have soft hands like your boss's daughters? We said, yes. Would you like to have pretty dresses like your boss's daughters? Yes, but you can't have them. So we got mad again. We didn't think that was fair. We worked, and their daughters didn't work.
There are women of many descriptions in this queer world, as everyone knows. Some are living in beautiful mansions and are wearing the finest of clothes. There are blue-blooded queens and princesses who have charms made of diamonds and pearls. But the only and thoroughbred lady is the rebel girl.
They used to say that we deserved a better life. And in fact, they used to say all the workers have a beautiful place. That's the way they used to tell us, you know. We used to be there listening. Say, we have music, good food, beautiful companionships. And we went for it. Who wouldn't? No? I was always on the picket line. Every day, every single day. But then the cops would come. And then they would start chasing us, swinging their clubs. They didn't care who they hit. Imagine on horseback to come after us. You had no chance.
Not a strike, they had a lot of cracked heads, not a striker. But anyway, we give and take. The cop tried to hit us, then we hit him back.
The strikers that they used to pick up every day was comical in a way. Picking them up, bring them to the jail. In fact, once I was arrested, the judge was sitting up there, and we had one cop on each side of us. And one cop said, you know what she called me? A GD snake. I looked up at the judge and I said, Your Honor, I don't use that kind of language. So he looked down at him and he said, case dismissed. And see that you understand right the next time. See that you understand right from now on. The week after, the other cop tried to date me out. It's true. That's really true.
What did you say to him?
I said, I'm sorry, but I don't go out with cops. Once we were striking in front of Weidman's, they started shooting. One man was on his porch holding his baby. He was shot. He had 5 children. Oh, gosh, what a big funeral that man had. Everybody crying. We never expected things like that. To be killed, shoot, never.
Well, the strike and poverty, because don't forget, it was 5 months.
We were asking for less hours and more pay, but we lost the strike. What happened to the I.W.W. after the strike? I don't know what happened anymore. I don't know. I never heard anything anymore. That hurt me because I thought for sure they would take over to be our union people. That's what I was looking forward to.
In the West, too, the I.W.W. spread perhaps even more conspicuously than it had in the East. One of the tactics that they used was to appear on soapboxes everywhere, all over the country, in city after city, and make speeches about the advantages of their union. They used the soapboxes as a recruiting station, and they attracted a lot of attention, especially from the police. And ordinances were passed to make it unlawful to hold street meetings, except for the Salvation Army, which is a religious organization, was exempted. This contest between the Salvation Army and the I.W.W. for street corners inspired one of the I.W.W. members, Joe Hill, to write a verse called The Preacher and the Slave.
Joe brought it in and turned it over to the secretary of the Portland local of the I.W.W., and he got out a leaflet on it, and long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked how about something to eat, they will answer with voices so sweet, you will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky, way up high, work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. And the Starvation Army, they play, and they sing, and they clap, and they pray, till they get all your coin on the drum. But they'll tell you when you're on the bum, you will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky, way up high, work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die.
A speaker would get up and start speaking or start singing, and the cops would grab him. Another one would jump up, and the cops would grab him. Still, they kept on coming. It was an endless stream.
I got up to speak fellow workers and was immediately pulled down by uniformed policemen, and I was charged with vagrancy, and zip, before I knew it, I was sentenced to 90 days in the workhouse.
What these fellows did when they were denied the rights was to fill the jails full of speakers, one after the other, arrested, so that it became embarrassing for the authorities to hold them. Cost too much to keep them, and got so full after a while that it was impossible to house them. So finally these ordinances were repealed. The I.W.W. really contributed greatly to the free speech fight in the United States.
Working men of all countries unite. Side by side we for freedom will fight. When this world and its wealth we have gained, to the grafters we'll sing this refrain. You will eat.
One of the free speech fights in Everett, Washington, was one of the most brutally suppressed of all of them.
Well, it was really rough in Everett them days. There was no, when we first started there in Everett, you know, there was no law against speaking on the street. They let the Salvation Army and others, everybody else, except up speak in the corner of the street. You know, remember this was horse and buggy days, and people walked downtown or took the streetcar downtown and walked around. There was no, we didn't block any street or anything, but for speaking there. And Sheriff McRae, when he and his deputies, they come down the street and beat us up, of course.
It was decided by the Free Speech Committee that we would go in still larger numbers, that the next time we went to Everett would be in daylight, and that we would advertise the meeting ahead of time. So we went. How many there were on the boat, I have no way of knowing. It was a regular passenger run.
We knew they were coming, of course. It was advertised a couple of days before it happened. All handbills all over town, and anyhow, it was on a Sunday morning.
The boat was loaded to capacity until they were as much to the last man that the boat was allowed to carry as passengers. So we went to Everett. Oh, how we sang. We sang on the way to Everett. Always singing. The I.W.W., wherever they congregated, no matter what they were faced, they were always song. But among them, I think the one that we sang most often was either Hold the Fort or Solidarity. Those songs they were sung, hold the fort for we are coming, Union men be strong. Side by side we battle onward, victory will come.
We knew they were coming. We were watching for them. And me and another fellow walked down there and tried to get on the dock. There they had a rope stretched across the street, which was against the law too, of course. But that's big business for you. They do any damn thing they want to. And the man that was on guard at that rope, I knew him right well. I knew him well. He was superintendent of the Ferry Baker sawmill, rifle over his shoulders. When we saw that, we knew there was going to be trouble because he had a gun on his shoulder. We knew darn well there was going to be something.
First was Don McGray. I remember him standing there, one hand in the air, one hand near the butt of his pistol. And he says, called out, "Who's your leaders?" Someone answers, "We're all leaders." He says, "You can't land here." Someone from the boat said, "The hell we can't." And almost immediately after that, a single shot was fired, and then a volley from the dock.
I don't know how many they shot. Nobody knows. Lots of them went overboard. Some jumped maybe, and some fell overboard. It was terrible. And a fellow, then they try to tell you that they didn't shoot anybody in the water. I know better. This other fellow, too, I wish he was alive. He's gone a long time ago. One man was swimming towards shore. He got about halfway to shore. And we run down the beach trying to see if we could find a boat to go out and help him, you know. But they got him, the bullets flying around him, and then bullets come our way, too, over by the shore. So it was no use. You couldn't do anything about it. The fellow sank, and his hat was floating around it afterwards. And they claimed they dragged that for the bodies, never found any bodies. That's a lot of baloney. Oh, man, what they wouldn't do. I'll never forget it as long as I live.
Those Wobblies who weren't killed or wounded were arrested and charged with murder. Later, all these charges were dropped. However, the events in Everett proved to be almost a declaration of independence for organizing the loggers of the Great Northwest.
The lumber of the Northwest was cut by timber beasts. And there was a saying that you could smell them before you could hear them, and you could hear them before you could see them.
A shanty man's life is a wearisome one, although some say it's free from care. It's the swinging of an axe from morning till night in the forest wild and free.
It'd be about like this. You'd have a big, huge bunkhouse and just pine boards and a great big barrel stove in the middle of the room, but they had no bathhouse, no shower bath, no way much to clean up except right in the bunkhouse there. And 150 men in that big barn of a bunkhouse.
And it was rotten food, and afraid that the brindlesmiths would carry off the plates. They nailed the plates down to the table and washed them out with a hose after they got through eating. That was the only washing that they got.
Grub was not too good. I guess they thought the cheapest kind of grub they could get. Bunkhouses, no mattresses.
We had to pack our own bedrolls, and that
spread lice and bed bugs and various things of that kind all over the country. There was no escaping them.
7 times major bones broken, and 7 times in the hospital. Arms broke, legs broke, ribs broke. One time I had the guts all squeezed out of my tail end. A log rolled on me. So I had that cut off in a lumbering accident in the small head rig at Chemout, Oregon.
Wallace Waite was our walking boss, and hell was to pay when he got cross. He tries his best his men to kill, crying come down heavy on the old dust hill. Roll, you tigers, roll. Roll, you heroes, roll. Let's roll all day, no sugar in your pay, while you're working on the Waite boys' rollway.
Sometimes organizing, you'd run into a mess of trouble. Like I went into a logging camp down on the lower Columbia River. If I remember right, it's Crown Willamette, and it could have been Deer Island now, I don't remember. But anyway, one of them, there was only about 6, 7 Wobblies in camp, or maybe 10 of them. And I thought that camp needed some organizing, and I goes in there and got started one day. I was 7 chokers. Started to work on the rigging crew. Come in that night, somebody had stole to the superintendent. He come at me with a double-bitted axe, hollering at me, "Get out of here, you red, commie, wobbly bastard." He run me clear out of camp. And I didn't like the looks of that double-bitted axe, so I just kept going, you know. But later we got the camp organized anyway. So it didn't make any difference. We finally got him.
That may have been one of the reasons why the lumber companies were so worried about all these little people, you might say, that were out organizing. They were not paid organizers. They were not professionals or anything. They were just lumberjacks.
They begin to send out what they call job delegates. They developed that technique. A man would be given a certain number of union cards, credentials, a number of constitutions, and always, but always, a little red songbook. A number of copies of the little red songbook would go along.
I met him in Dakota when the harvesting was o'er. A wob he was, I saw, by the button that he wore. He was talking to a bunch of stiffs in the jungles near the tracks. He said, "You guys whose homes are on your backs, why don't you stick together with the Wobblies in one band and fight to change conditions for the workers in this land? When you wear that button, the Wobblies' red button, and carry a red card, no need to hike, boys, along this old pike, boys, every Wobbly will be your pard. The boss will be leery, the stiffs will be cheery when we hit John Farmer hard. For he'll be affrighted when we stand united and carry a red card."
In the grain fields, we harvested every major grain that grew in North America. Wheat, oats, barley, rye.
The heat was 110 to 112 to 114 degrees temperature out in the sun. And you could look across the plains and see a freight train from miles away.
It was by the day in the early days. So much a day, it wasn't by the hour. Whether you worked 8 hours or 14 hours.
When we got to the harvest field, up to within a few days before the harvest started, we were unwanted. Anytime you pass through a large city and their jails were getting emptier than they wanted them to be, and they saw a stiff, as we called ourselves. They saw a stiff, who's more likely to throw in there, because who cares? See? So when they wanted their jails filled for brutal purposes, or if there was a county road to be built with free labor, the chain gang awaited us.
And we was, this weekend was picked up, and next Monday or Tuesday we had a trial. And we had a lawyer them days. That was before we quit having lawyers. On top of that building is a statue, he said. That statue represents liberty. These men deserve their liberty. Oh, he went on and on and on. And in the meantime, the judge fell asleep. The cuter, that was the prosecutor. We call him cuter, you know. Woke him up and says, $25, 30 days in jail. And we stayed there the full 30 days.
I had a job once threshing wheat, worked 16 hours with hands and feet. And when the moon was shining bright, they kept me working all the night. One moonlit night, I hate to tell, I accidentally slipped and fell. My pitchfork went right in between some cogwheels of that thresh machine.
Stingy roof said, well, 1,000 gone to hell. But I did sleep that night. I needed it all right.
Another one of the I.W.W. tactics was sabotage, which was anything from slowing down on the job to threatening violence, which they didn't practice as a matter of fact, but it certainly scared employers into thinking they did.
If Freedom's road seems rough and hard and strewn with rocks and thorns, just put your wooden shoes on pard, and you won't hurt your corns. To organize and teach, no doubt, is very good, that's true, but still you cannot get along without the good old wooden shoe. The wooden shoe is a symbol of the sabbat. The sabbat was the French worker, when he wanted to rest, he'd throw his sabbat in the machinery and would break it down, and that's where the word sabotage came from.
Now, if you want to know what sabotage really means, it don't mean, as the French used the word, sabot, throw a wooden shoe into the machine. Nor did it mean burning down sawmills. For what is the reason, what would be the sense in burning down your source of employment?
What did sabotage mean?
The conscious withdrawal of efficiency.
I'd be damned if I know. They were, though. They figured we was a bunch of roughnecks, you know, when they called us, I want works and I want whiskey and all kinds of names. But we wouldn't work unless we got decent treatment out of it either.
As the old story goes, there was a little girl went to the door, and a harvest hand or a wobbly was at the door begging for some work to do, for something to eat. She said, Mama, they was right during the harvest season, there's a bum at the door. And the mama said, that isn't any bum, that's a harvest worker. A month later, the harvest was over, and the same Wobbly was at the door wrapping for something to eat, for something, work to do, and the little girl said, "Mama, there's a harvest worker at the door." She said, "That's no harvest worker, that's a bum."
Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand out to revive us again.
Why don't you work like the other men do? How in hell can I work when there's nothing to do?
Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand out to revive us again. And why don't you save all the money you earn? If I had to eat, I'd have money to burn. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand out to revive us again.
Riding a freight train is a miserable existence, but it was the only way the migratory worker could go from job to job or seeking a job. There's nothing more discouraging than to ride a boxcar 8, 10, 12 hours between one division to another division. Hungry, cold, wet, lousy, and look out across the country and see the lights in a house, the people gathered around the table. Be all wet and look at this beautiful light in the distance or close by as you roll along in a boxcar or wait for another train to pass.
The migratory worker is the most remarkable body of men that could ever be developed on any planet. A job, a big job, a bridge is to be built. As it becomes known that this big job is going to take place, men of the various skills from the remote corners of this country will come to that job.
In those days, we had to fight the railroad crew. They were petty racketeers. They would come along, the engineer, the fireman, the two brakemen, and the conductor with pick handles in their hand, and they would make everybody donate either $1 to ride a division or your pocket watch or your pocket knife. The Wobblies put a stop to that when we beat the hell out of a few dozen train crews. They got the message real quickly that they weren't going to shake us down in order to ride a train crew.
I wanted to have the experience of bumming a ride on a freight train because I'd heard so much about it. And the I.W. boys traveled that way. So I did take a freight train from Chicago to St. Louis. And I had to show the I.W.W. card to get a ride. The trainman would not accept you without one.
So they have a lot of trouble with hijackers. The hijackers would start at the back of a train and rob people and unload them. They were particularly looking for organizers because they might have $1,000 or more of funds, organization funds in a satchel. So they were in great danger to the organizers. So they organized this flying squadron.
I was elected to the flying squadron. Our job was to get the hijacks. The hijacks would come in. They'd generally work in 3 and 4 together, all armed with 38s or 45s, mostly 38s, and they'd stick up 100 harvest hands in a boxcar. They had a rope ladder that they come down over the top with and into the freight trains, and if somebody got a little smart with them, they would give them a push and the train would be going 30, 40 miles an hour, and they would fall under the freight train and be ground to bits. That was known as greasing the rails, and it was quite a common factor. We took the hijacks, many of them, and we took a gem razor blade and cut I.W.W, I on the forehead and W on each cheek, and put permanganate potassium into it, and it marked them up.
We were rebellious slaves. Got to get that in. We were rebellious slave, and there is no more heinous or no more dangerous criminal in the world than a rebellious slaves, and that's what we were.
Oh, we hate this rotten system more than any mortals do. Our aim is not to patch it up, but build it all anew. And what we'll have for government whenever we are through is one big industrial union. Hooray, hooray, we're gonna paint it red. Hooray, hooray, the way is clear ahead. We're gaining shop democracy and liberty and bread with one big industrial union.
We were on strike against Stone and Webster in Concrete, Washington. We were building a dam and tunnels for the city of Seattle, and it was miserable. We went on strike to get more money. About the 20th or 21st of October, they started shipping in scabs. We found out where they were shipping them from Minneapolis, and so a bunch of us beat our way back to Minneapolis to Murray and Reddy, who was the employment agency that was shipping them. And so the ones that were first-class scabs we unloaded between Minneapolis and Concrete, and the ones that would go along and wouldn't scab, we let them go with us. And so when we come to Concrete, Washington, they took us off of the train and put us on buses to take us up to Stone and Webster. And here we come singing, "Hold the fort, for we are coming, Union men be strong. Side by side we battle onward, victory will come." And it made them so goddamn pissed off because they'd fed us and wined and dined us all the way from Minneapolis to Concrete. And all they'd entertain was a bunch of Wobblies who'd fill their goddamn shipment.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boy's in line. Over there.
Well, lots of them went in the army. They were drafted. We didn't take any stand as an organization. We left it to the individual. Of course, we was against war, most of us, and all of us. But we didn't tell anybody what to do. They do the damn thing.
Say a prayer, send the word, send the word.
A socialist in the trenches, I'd laugh every time I remember him. He asked a guy why he was over there. He said, well, England, France, and Italy, they all owed us money. He said, bullshit, they never owed you a friggin' nickel, and I'll prove it. So he said, come on, and he started down the trench, asking everybody, does England, France, and Italy owe you any money? Hell no. And everybody said no, you know.
Were there any Wobblies in the...
Oh, a few, yeah, here and there. Younger ones like me, stupid, you know.
This is the people's war, labor's war. The final outcome will be determined in the factories, the shops, the mines, the farms, the production and transportation agencies of the various countries. The workers have a part in this war equal with our fighting boys.
The American Federation of Labor, which of course was the established union and very patriotic, and engaged in an agreement with the government not to strike during war. The I.W.W. would not subscribe to that. War production required immense quantities of timber, and the I.W.W. really controlled the great timber areas of the Northwest, therefore attracting the government's attention, particularly when the I.W.W. engaged in strikes against the conditions under which logging was done.
The general strike developed in the summer of 1917, and it spread up and down the Pacific coast. And it was led by the I.W.W.
In summer of 1917, the woods were almost solidly organized. The lumberjack, the most individualistic worker that you can think of, the big man idea, Paul Bunyan complex. Now the solidarity was such. Not one logger remained in the camps wherever we could get in communication with that camp to tell them that the strike was on.
50,000 lumberjacks, 50,000 packs, 50,000 dirty shells on their backs. 50,000 minds made up to strike and strike like men. For 50 years they packed a bed, but never will again.
They tried every way to break up the strike. They sent soldiers in there. Soldiers that never had an axe in their hand. They didn't know they get lost if they walked around a big stump.
They organized the spruce division. That's the way they used the army as strike breakers.
They called them the Loyal Legion of Loggers. We called them the lousy, long-legged loggers. Wave the flag with one hand and rob you with the other.
So we soon defeated their efforts because they were so patently on the side of the company. You know. Sometimes the superintendent of the mill would be president of the local.
So the whole forces of the government, the army, whatnot, was set against the I.W.W, and frequently they would be taken and put into like stockades to lock them up. So the idea occurred to transfer the strike back to the job.
The strike on the job, in my estimation, was the best tactic that ever came out of the I.W.W. Better than the sit-down strike later, because the workers stayed on the job and got their pay, but they slowed production down sometimes 50%. And that soon brought the bosses to their knees, quicker than anything else ever did.
One of the things they would do, they would work 8 hours, and everybody would walk off the job. The boss would, some of them would say, hey, we worked 10 hours on this job. Well, that's all right. We worked 8 today. We'll work 2 more for you tomorrow. The last of all to give in was Warehouser.
We were striking for the 8-hour day, and we got it. And the Knights of Labor had failed, the AFL had failed. We made it, the I.W.W.
The town of Bisbee, Arizona, down in the dark of the Copper Queen mine. There's blood on the ore and the miners lie in the roads that never saw sun nor sky. Roads that never saw sun nor sky. In the town of Bisbee, you don't sleep easy. Often the earth will tremble and roll. And the earth gets restless, miners die. Bone and blood is the price of ore. Bone and blood is the price of ore.
By summer of 1917, there were not only 50,000 I.W. loggers on strike, but 40,000 copper miners in Montana and New Mexico and Arizona.
Town of Bisbee, Arizona, late in the year of 17. The day still comes and the sun still shines, but it's dark as a grave in the Copper Queen mines. Dark as a grave in the Copper Queen mines.
When I got up and looked out across the alleyway, I guess you'd call it, well, here was a fellow with a gun looking at a padlock on a bachelor's quarters. You know, bachelors, a lot of bachelors in Bisbee those days. And there was a bachelor had some cabins behind us, and this fellow was looking at this padlock and had this big gun.
There was a bunch of people right this in Park Avenue coming down towards me because I have to cross that street. And I say, man, what is wrong with Milan? What is wrong? What is it all about? You know, naked, bleeding. Oh, he says, we don't know nothing ourselves. There was boarding house up here. And they throw them 4 o'clock in the morning out of the beds and throw them in this line. Get
There was just like come from the sky at that moment, just like lightning or thundering. But now they come back with the truck and took my husband. And my husband was spitting blood that day. You know how they get excited. Everybody, we ask, what? He said, you know how the people are. But we don't know. But then the truck come there, one of the paid scab. And they throw him on the truck. Didn't have shoes, tie, or hat, or nothing out of bed. And I asked our renter, we had a rent house down there. I says, my God, please, don't be so rough with him. I said, can't you see how he feels? He killed the gun, you know, those long guns. Knocked it on the floor. We haven't got time. Get ready. It's everything like an army ready to jump. On the roof, there were a machine gun. They're going to shoot if anybody going to jump from train. 1,270 or some men. Boxcars, like a cattle. And then they take them down to New Mexico, to Columbus, New Mexico, without water, without anything. They kept them there for 24 hours without a drop of water in July.
And they claimed it wasn't for the Army, being an Army camp there, and this Army officer feeding them men, that they would have been in bad shape. There was no water, no nothing there for them. They had no accommodation made at all for the men. They were just dumped out on the desert like a bunch of animals. And they claimed after that Bisbee always paid 50 cents more a day than Butte, Montana, because the Phelps Dodge wanted to keep the Union out.
We were accused of subversion. We were accused of being pro-German. We were accused of helping the Kaiser. I.W.W. goes on strike. He's helping the Kaiser. Every time that they stopped the industries, more of our boys must die on the Western battlefield. And that was continually harped on through the press. The media took that up. And it was in there until everybody was convinced that a member of the I.W.W. had a spear-headed tail and wore horns.
Now, 1917 was a revolutionary time in world history. And the challenge to the West, of the Western Revolution, of the socialist movement, of the left labor movement, was one which put fear into the hearts of the owners of property and the defenders of the status quo.
I was working in the camp when the Russian Revolution started. And they had terrific arguments every night in the bunkhouses. The Wobblies did among themselves over the Russian Revolution. The chairman, he'd get up and open the meeting, and he'd generally bang a cork shoe on a table to bring everybody to attention. And he'd holler, he'd say, gather around here, fellow workers, we got a goddamn revolution to talk about tonight. So they'd be discussing the Russian Revolution. This chairman, he was one of the pro-political faction. He'd get up and say something like this. He'd say, well, the Ruskies beat us to it. We got to re-examine what we're doing and see where we're short in this country, because the fact remains they've done the trick and we're still talking about it over here. Then another one from the opposition side would grab him by the shirt and say, sit down, you big Hoosier, you don't know what you're talking about. So it was fast and furious and generally break up with fist fights, you know, between the two factions.
Between the anarchists and the communists, there were two of them were battling over the Wobblies in there.
Well, after the communist movement came into being in 1917, on the world scene, that is, why, that split the Wobblies wide open.
The I.W.W. was weakened on two fronts at once, at the same time as they were being torn by internal conflicts. The hostility to the I.W.W. for their efforts to improve their own conditions during the war reached a feverish pitch. The I.W.W. were blamed for everything, and therefore the government moved against them.
One night they raided the old hall, carried everything in the middle of the street and burned it.
Just as I got near the hall, the secretary come the other way to open the hall, and we both got to the door together. And we didn't need a key to open. It was broken in, our furniture all smashed up, typewriters and books and everything was all over the floor.
There were 3 trials in the I.W.W., I think 3 wartime trials under the same kind of indictments. But the Chicago trial was the most conspicuous because all the leaders were there, everybody. They scooped up everyone that had any prominence at all in the organization. It was one of the great historic trials in free speech in the United States. The lawyer who handled the I.W.W. case was a very skillful man, George Vanderveer. I thought he made such a good case of the legitimate activities of the I.W.W.
Your Honor, these men here are guilty of nothing more than belonging to a labor union. A labor union that recognizes that this war is not being fought to keep the world safe for democracy, but merely to expand industrial markets.
There were 101 men, I think the number was, on trial under the federal law concerning obstruction of recruiting and enlistment. And it was all based on tally of speeches and on what had written in the I.W.W. press. There were no other charges, but those words, those language, those condemnations of the war were construed to discourage people from joining the army, and that was the theory of the government. Completely upset the appellate court. They were all convicted, given very savage sentences. But that was war hysteria. I have no doubt that they hoped that they would destroy the I.W.W. by these prosecutions.
These men, they did serve time in prison for something that they jumped up on them and to get rid of them. And while they were in prison, that was one of the ways that they had of breaking up the I.W.W.
Bill Haywood and others who were out on bail on appeal had skipped the country. They'd gone to Russia, half a dozen of them. I went to the very tragic thing for the fellows that were left because they had to pay very high sums of money. But he went because the refuge was offered to him, and he just couldn't face any long term in jail.
Naturally, there was an air of sadness, but at the same time, there was also this feeling, and I recall it very well, that this is not the end, but the struggle will have to go on. And regardless of what happens to our members, we who are on the outside must keep on trying to do the work that they had started.
And we had a large moral issue with the I.W.W. boys in getting them out, because the government said you've got to apply for a parole or a pardon on these papers, because that's the way we do business. And these papers say you were convicted, and you've got to admit that you were convicted of a crime. And these fellows said, never will we admit that we were convicted of a crime.
It wasn't only the Wobblies they took it out on, it was the trade unionists in general that they took it out on, but everybody was a Wobbly to them that wanted anything at all.
Although most of the members of the I.W.W. were Americans, there were a considerable number of foreigners who were deported by Attorney General Amy Palmer in the so-called Palmer raids.
From their lopsided faces, sloping brows, and misshapen features may be recognized the unmistakable criminal type.
They'd raid their homes and pinch these guys. They were looking for foreigners, and they got very few foreigners amongst the Wobblies. They picked up poor foreigners that didn't belong to any organization at all and deported them out of the country on suspicion that they were Wobblies or socialists.
They go wild over me, although I've never done them harm that I can see. I'm as gentle as a lamb, but they take me for a ram. They go wild, simply wild over me. Oh, the cop, he went wild over me, and he held his gun where everyone could see. He was breathing rather hard when he saw my union card. He went wild, simply wild over me. Will the roses grow wild over me? When I've gone into the land that is to be. When my soul and body part in the stillness of my heart, will the roses grow wild over me?
By that time, already hundreds and hundreds of I.W.Ws had been arrested elsewhere. That we kind of took an attitude, well, if you take why don't you take me too? You understand? So we kept on organizing.
Wobbly delegate, a fellow said to him after he'd written out a card to him, he said, "What's this card entitle me to?" He said, "If they catch you with it," the delegate told him, "it entitles you to 2 to 14 years in San Quentin or Folsom."
It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was still at the typewriter. Mrs. Stilling, my wife, had already retired, when there was a knock on the door, and there was a man who seemed to be well under the influence of liquor. And he had a piece of paper in his hand, and he says, "Are you stealing?" And I said, "Yes, and you're under arrest."
I was tried once by myself, and the jury disagreed, and then I was tried again in the fall with 2 other wobs that they had picked up, and convicted that time. Went to San Quentin, November the 7th, 1923, the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution.
And when did you get out?
I got out in March the 7th, 1927.
After I had been imprisoned and returned, and I had still was under surveillance by the government, I could not be the same I.W.W. that I was before.
The I.W.W. lingered on for several years after they had gone to prison, but it wasn't effective because we had several, to come along and tried to, and did what they could, but the opposition, the odds were just against us.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, members of the jury, this I.W.W., these Wobblies, have been charged with conspiracy to violate the law by means of force. They pose as a labor union, taking orders from Mr. Haywood, a tyrannical sovereign who sends his messengers across the country to carry out strife and disorder. Make no mistake, their purpose was to paralyze and destroy this country so completely that none of you would be safe, no value you hold sacred would be untouched. This government finally woke up and put a stop to the scheme that this trial has made absolutely apparent.
And now it is up to you, members of the jury, to put the end to this plot by finding each and every one guilty as charged.
We are both rebels, and we will probably remain so as long as we are conscious.
I want to see the working class organized so that the 2 or so billion wage workers of the world can make use of this planet without doing what some parasite tells them to do. If that's a rebel, then I'm a rebel.
Oh, yes, I'll die that way. I couldn't be anything else.
All in one for all. And only that time we're going to get what we want. Because the world cannot run without the labor. You are just poor man what you are. But without this, nothing moves.
Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union men, be strong. Side by side we battle onward. Victory will come. We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union men, be strong. Side by side we battle.